Hi, this is John Costa from S24. We have an occasional series we do called Sahel Watch, which we're looking to make into a more permanent program. So we're talking to lots of experts, people with lots of in-depth knowledge about the security situation, both within Nigeria and also the wider Sahel region. And I'm delighted today to be able to invite to speak to me someone that I met on Instagram recently. And was very impressed with his analysis of the insecurity situation, particularly how he broke it down here in Nigeria. So thank you for joining me,
Thank,
Mr. Williams.
thank you for having me.
That's
Like,
great. So tell me a little bit about how did you first become interested in the security issue, insecurity in Nigeria and the wider Sahel?
I've always been interested in governance, politics, security, and um, the instruments of governance from a very young age. I didn't grow up watching cartoons. I read newspapers. I watched news. So I always understood how the world worked. Most of the major events that's happened in the 21st century, from when I was young, I think I followed it all through till date. So I've always been interested in things like that. So I read a lot of governments and interesting stories that piqued my interest. And at the same time, I've been a supporter of the armed forces of Nigeria and their efforts. So I used to always sit down and ask myself, if I can't join, how best can I support and, let people know what's going on and how best to approach the problems we face in Nigeria. So that's one of the main things that got my interest
Mm,
in the whole security aspects in Nigeria.
interesting, particularly as a long-term supporter of the Nigerian military, all of the various branches. It's you get to understand why people join, what the operations are, maybe the various border issues that Nigeria's had for many years.
Mm.
60 years anniversary next year of the Biafran War. So we've got lots of things to talk about there about the role of the Nigerian military. So growing up with that kind of interest, reading newspapers and books and sort of finding out information, do you think you have an affinity with a Nigerian serviceman that's in the northeast at the moment, sort of fighting Boko Haram? Is this what you're trying to get across, the sort of the reality of this person as well?
Yes, that's one of the things I'm trying to get across because growing up, I watched a lot of history and I watched a lot of documentaries of journalists, reporters, analysts embedding themselves with US forces, British forces, Australian forces, and showing what life looked like in Afghanistan, Iraq, and other places around the world. And that really piqued my interest. And I would always sit down and look at Nigeria and be like, why aren't we doing this? Why are our journalists not embedding themselves to show the realities of these men and women and what's really like in tackling the situation? Because it's comfortable to just say the armed forces aren't doing well, this, that. But, you have to tell the story and show it for what it is for people to understand. And growing up and looking during the Shekau era in Nigeria, I think this was like 2013, 12, you know, I I witnessed that, and for me, there was a lot of misinformation going around. I didn't really understand what was going on. And every time I asked questions, I always got vague answers. So I always took it upon myself to do my own research and make of whatever information I find. But I do share an affinity with the armed forces because everyone in the armed forces are from every section of this country, even from my state. If a soldier is fighting in the northeast, northwest, wherever, they could be from any part of the country. They could be from my village, I don't know. But yes, I share an affinity with every night serviceman in the country.
And do you think that your sort of average Nigerian um, has one, an understanding of the security situation in somewhere like the Northeast? And also, do you think that being part of the armed forces is a respected profession within Nigeria? Yeah.
From a scale of 1 to 10, I'll put that at a 4. The average Nigerian doesn't understand what's going on in terms of security in Nigeria, and that is not their fault. I would blame that partly on the media, the government, and also the security agencies. Because if we look at, for instance, what's going on in Ukraine, they are fighting two fronts. There is the propaganda front and there's the actual front, and if the Nigerian state is failing in pushing its messages out and letting people understand the realities, because it's not about headlines. People need to see, people need to feel, emotions need to be involved. So these are just the things. So you could go on a patrol with and show a couple of burnt villages and whatever, but that still doesn't tell the story.
It's a controlled message
Yeah,
as
it's
opposed to the
controlled,
reality.
and I also believe that Nigerians have become numb to the current situation, and because there are killings going on every daily basis. So it's just they see it as another headline and they tend not to want to get mixed up with it.
Mm. And do you think that being part of the Nigerian Armed Forces is seen as a respected profession within Nigeria, or is it again because it's misunderstood or not reported in a particular way?
Well, times are changing, and I believe there used to be a time joining the armed forces would be a first option for anyone, for any young person starting out their lives. But as it stands, there are a lot of question marks, and being respectable and people being receptive to joining are two different things, and it depends on region. So if you look at the southern region, the eastern part, joining the military is not really seen as prestigious or as much respectable than starting up a business. And if you go to the southwest, joining the military is quite respectable, but the expectation is to go to university and pursue academics.
Everybody has different
Yeah,
expectations of what
but
the
it's
military's for.
different.
Yeah.
It's different
Mm.
in the northern part of Nigeria.
Mm.
There is a huge respect and love for the military across board, even within families.
I've come
Yeah.
across quite a few people actually when I've been explaining that we're developing Sahel Watch as a kind of different kind of program, if you
Mm,
like, and then talking about the Biafran documentary that we're working on, maybe some different stories to do with the conflict 60 years ago. The amount of people then say, "Oh, I'm from a military family," or "So and so was retired," or "I've got family
yeah.
serving at the moment," and obviously it comes down to a lot of anxiety and stuff, particularly wives who can get married and then not see the husband for a very long time, and then they can't really get home. So I think there's this disconnect between what the public thinks maybe a soldier does or
Mm,
someone in the military and what the cold hard reality is of coming home, and salary and the amount they get paid and
hmm.
stuff.
And I feel like even putting it to the Nigerian people, whether it's respectable, is even unfair because I genuinely believe the state itself doesn't regard the military. Because if you look in terms of welfare, it's really nothing to write home about because it should be a situation of a soldier's only regret is not having a second life to sacrifice for his state. But it's only one life we all have. And when welfare isn't optimum or to the standards where it's meant to be compared to other countries, it's telling. And in the time of social media where everyone's seeing what's going on in different regions, you know, it's just what it is. But I feel the decline of the respect of the military is attributed to the state, the government itself, the politicians.
Is poverty and unemployment amongst young people one of the drivers behind, you know, banditry and Katsina and,
Yeah.
and that kind of stuff? And what it really made me think about is we're talking about young people being susceptible to a particular message, a particular radicalization,
Mm,
or just being susceptible to someone coming along and saying, well, actually, here's a job. You can come and do this. Unfortunately, it involves criminality and banditry,
mm,
and you might need to believe this. Why wouldn't it be attractive to young people? Yet we've got young people in the Nigerian armed forces whose welfare maybe isn't necessarily first and foremost in
mm.
politicians and some of their leadership, that they're in exactly the same situation. You're there doing something where maybe people don't have your best interests at
Yeah,
heart, and we've got these people in conflict.
that's going on, but I feel it's more of a situation whereby it's an economy. people are benefiting off it. I don't know what anyone would expect from a child that grew up in an ungoverned space for majority of his life. He's probably not even been to the local government headquarters, talk less of his state capital. So these people don't know better. They don't know one from one. And whatever options given to them, in promise of a better life is what's taken. And the world is very different. People in different geographies and areas think very differently and approach things very differently. And regardless of standards of life, the good life, and amenities are available to them, they would rather stay true to the latter than, go for the other aspects. So it's just what it is. So we need more government presences in the outskirts of Nigeria in all the dark spots.
Mm.
Light, the nation needs light basically, because wherever there's light, there can be darkness. So when there's government presence in all these ungoverned spaces, there are schools, there are hospitals, there are thriving businesses. There is an efficient taxation system whereby people see what their money is being used for. It just changes the decision of whatever youth in whichever location, because you can say the same thing for a youth that is in the Niger Delta bunkering crude oil. You know, there are ungoverned spaces in those places, but you know, everybody's fight is different, but it's all the same situation.
Now, one of the things that first drew me, or the main thing that drew me to your Instagram feed, was an article that you wrote about the Hydra,
Mm,
the multi-headed Hydra, and the four different uh, types of conflict that are currently going on in Nigeria. It's easy to say Nigeria is at war. Yes, it is, but then people tend to think Nigeria is at war with Boko Haram in the northeast and
mm,
the Chad, Lake Chad Basin. Whereas what you described were, you know, lots of other kind of micro conflicts that were going on that a fisted Nigerian military or the army specifically
mm.
is not equipped to deal with. Maybe, fighting Boko Haram should be one thing, but should the military be used for any of these other conflicts? So just take me through what the four different types of things that were going on in
So
Nigeria you mentioned.
I even feel there are even more than four, but I had to limit it to just four. If we look at the northeast, there's terrorism. If we look at the northwest, there are elements of terrorism or banditry. And if you come to the southwest, there's kidnapping, there is armed robbery, there's cultism, and there's also elements of terrorism, because in recent years we've seen at recent attacks by ISWAP, Boko Haram in states like Ondo, Oyo, and the rest. So, which which never really happened. And if you come to the southeast, we have agitators, secessionists, and when it comes to the south, we have economic um saboteurs. So they all apply the same methodology basically, because all the armed groups, all the non-state actors, all kidnap is an economy. It's a way to finance their operations. But not all of them are armed robbers. Not all of them tax like ISWAP and Lakurawa in the northwest. So it needs to be approached very differently. But the problem is now these groups are becoming more heavily armed, and you need to approach them more heavy-handedly. Should we?
So
Should
they're harder to deal with because they're
yeah,
more heavily armed, yeah,
yeah,
and more sophisticated in many cases with weaponry and drones
and
than
terrain.
the people that are going to,
hmm
yeah, the armed forces themselves.
Terrain also plays a factor. You being a soldier, probably you trained somewhere else, and you're moving to a region you really don't know the terrain. You don't know the people. You really don't know left to right. It's going to be easy to for these people to gather information, track your movement, even lay ambushes. But at the same time, it's not all problems that has to be met militarily, but it's a useful instrument because if we make the price of criminality too high to pay, it becomes not profitable because if you know that, okay, if I kidnap people, I'm still going to get bombed by the Air Force regardless, it doesn't make it profitable. Do you understand? So,
So the level of deterrence
yeah,
should impact
yeah,
the proliferation of certain things. Yeah.
yeah. So, violence escalation should be determined by the states and not by the groups because now the net's been casted wide. Anybody is fair game for them. They would pick up anyone, they would attack any schools. When it comes to Nigerian schools, a different methodology needs to be applied to them in terms of security. It has to be a different outfit entirely. You know, we can't have policemen protecting every federal and state school, but an arrangement needs to be made, whether within the people in the communities. We need to know how many federal schools do we have in the whole country, how many state schools are there, where are their locations, how many security people are manning and protecting these points. You know, we also have to invest in infrastructure, you know, because road networks matter. Because if you have to travel 5 kilometers to respond to an emergency, and it's going to take you probably 10 minutes because of bad roads or what, or bad terrain, it's probably going to take you 5 to 10
And people
hours.
know that, don't they? Local people know that's how long it's going to take to get
Exactly.
there. Yeah.
So that's just how it needs to be approached.
Are you advocating that the military should be fighting combatants, in a combative way? In the northeast, for example, Boko Haram
Mm,
and those kind of insurgencies, and we need a new structure, or a new sort of armed federal structure to be able to deal with some of these other groups? Or do you think it's better if it's left at the state level? So, for example, in last November, I went to Katsina State at the invitation of the state governor and met some members of Community Watch Corps that were local people, a militia that's been raised, equipped with
mm,
vehicles and equipment. Well, of course, because they're local, they know the local routes, they know where the ambushes are going to be and
mm,
stuff like that. And obviously, it started quite a controversial process of paying bandits to lay down
mm,
their arms and reintegrate. And interviewing him, and he was saying to me, "Well, we've just got to try something.
mm.
If it's not going to work, we can't rely on the federal government. We need to try local solutions to our local challenges." Do you think more support should be given to those kind of initiatives?
More support should be given to those initiatives, but more innovative type of support. Now, looking at the most modern conflict, the Russian-Ukraine conflict, we saw that Russia and Ukraine made use of former inmates to shore up their numbers and make advances. Both sides did that. I feel that should be extended to these terrorists, in which whereby they are going to be the first line of defense in every community. They are going to be the ones embedded in the bush. They're going to be the first line of intel. Why? Because serve 2 years, get your freedom, get some compensation. And at the same time, we need to create incentives to let the security men, operatives, to go out and seek these people. Because it's another thing sitting in your base and waiting for others, and it's another thing taking the initiative. Now, if you look at Ukraine and Russia, they have a system whereby for every enemy equipment you destroy or any enemy you capture, there's a monetary incentive for that. So, you know, if for this local vigilantes who are tasked to protecting communities have some form of structure like that, that lets them know that, okay, if we go out and look for bandits or terrorists to capture or eliminate, we get financial incentives for them. That's a morale booster because it makes the security operatives more active and makes them want to go out and seek these people and not always reacting and waiting for them to come.
How do we approach the situation in the southeast with the secessionist movement and stuff, IPOP and those remnants of the
Mm.
Biafran War from 60 years ago, which are still there, a kind of separate state. Do you think that's gone on too long to be able to deal with something effectively like that? Or are we in the situation where, like, we had Northern Ireland, for example, in the United Kingdom with for many years with the Troubles and the IRA, wanting a united Ireland,
Mm.
and then we've got the peace agreement. Do you think we'll ever get to the point where the government is able to sit down with the secessionists and agree a peace?
So for me, when I look at conflicts and the possibilities of them exploding, I look at what people stand to lose and what they stand to gain. When we come to the southeast, after the Biafran War, I feel the Igbo people have come to a realization that war is destructive and it's bad for business. So the few elements who are IPOB and trying to make secessionist claims are very few minority. You can be sympathetic to a movement, but doesn't necessarily mean you're willing to die for the movement or go out and do the act to carry out the intent of that ideology or what you believe. So you can believe in Biafra, but you
Do
know,
you want to die for it?
yeah.
Yeah.
So those are two different things. But in order to address the Biafran problem, because you even find youths, people who were not born during this conflict, having an animosities that, oh, we died during the civil war and all. The government needs to do more for the region to feel more Nigerian and not separated from the whole country, but which I feel like the current administration is making tremendous efforts towards. But a lot can be better because there's a saying that when you beat a child, you still use that same hand to call the child and temper the child down. So, if a group is saying that some people do things and get away with it, and when we do it, we don't get away with it creates animosity, it creates unfair balance. People feel cheated because at the end of the day, Nigeria is a construct and there's some form of social contract amongst all of us. So we need to feel like the country belongs to all of us and not for a few. And also, because at the end of the day, like the Igbos control the Nigerian economy. They're responsible for a large part of the Nigerian economy. And I doubt, seeing something like ISWAP going on in that region. But with time, it's probably something that would be part of history, but Nigerian identity would always still remain.
My final question, I want to kind of focus on technology and the use of technology. Now, I know from looking at your Instagram feed and reading your Substack that you're very widely read and you're very knowledgeable through international relations and reading papers and watching documentaries and all this sort of stuff. You do your homework before a single thing comes out the tip of your
Yeah.
fingers or a word comes out your mouth. So I know you're very kind of
Mm.
thoughtful with these things. And at the moment, the world seems to be in a lot of turmoil. There's a lot of conflicts, and you mentioned the Russia-Ukraine war earlier, and the use that's being made of drone technology, robots, for example, recent developments in the last 3 or 4 weeks. Ukrainian robot units getting Russian service personnel to recruit, so therefore no personnel are being committed to the fight at all. Do you think that the time has come for the whole porous border situation in Nigeria to be dealt with when it comes to a firm fence, wall, line of defense, trench system,
I don't
and the
see,
use of
I don't,
technology?
I hear people talk about a wall and I question people's intelligence when they say they want to build a wall because what type of wall do you want to build
Mm,
around almost 1,000
mm, mm.
kilometers? And each region is of different terrain. We can't cover that. So we have to apply technology to this. But building a wall doesn't solve the problem. You can fence your house, but if your neighbor's house is porous, they'll still keep scaling your fence and attacking you. And looking at what's going on in West Africa, Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, they are all going through a very bad situation. And these countries need to be stabilized for Nigeria to stabilize. Because now, if we look at recently the uptick in Boko Haram's and all the insurgents' activities, you see that it happened when the French left the Sahel and the US left. So there's no longer cooperation. Security ties changed, meaning they had ties with the French. Back in 2014, 2013, Jonathan had gone to, the former president had gone to France, and there was a security agreement between the French government, Nigeria, and the Francophone countries in tackling insurgency, that which is what led to the multinational joint task force, which is operating, which I don't really know to what capacity currently, but these states need to collaborate. The whole West Africa, the whole ECOWAS needs to collaborate. That's why I was even happy when I heard of a joint task force, but not a joint task force to combat coups, but to address insecurity. Because at the end of the day, insecurity is what has led to all the coups in most of the Francophone countries. So ECOWAS needs to come together and build a more robust strategy in addressing insecurity. So whether it's a situation where all African countries create a coalition, and it's a coalition not just based off military attacks, civil society, justice, education, and all that, because as you're clearing a region, other systems should move in to fill in the gap, so that people know that the state is present, because at the end of the day, ungoverned spaces is what feeds terrorism. If we look at this others to the main Sahel countries like Niger, almost one part of Niger is run by the terrorists, one part is run by the government, and is a similar situation with Burkina Faso and Mali. So ungoverned spaces need to be put in check. If not, it's just going to be a cascading situation. Already, JNI are making incursions into Benin Republic. Nigeria has deployed troops and assets in Benin Republic to assist them in this whole situation, because if Benin Republic falls, Nigeria falls, because that means these people have the Western corridor to come into Nigeria more effectively. And the Western region, if you look at the geography, it's very, very dense vegetation. It's a forest, basically, which is prime location, which is prime real estate for these terrorists. They want to be there. They don't want to be in the cities. So we need to have a check on all ungoverned spaces around Africa, or better still, West Africa, and close the envelope on them. That's just the best thing. But a holistic strategy needs to be developed in order to address this. Because at the end of the day, these are not foreigners. They're not coming from somewhere. They are actually Africans. So we're fighting an ideology. Back in 2014, 2013, Jonathan had gone to, the former president had gone to France, and there was a security agreement between the French government, Nigeria, and the Francophone countries in tackling insurgency, that which is what led to the multinational joint task force, which is operating, which I don't really know to what capacity currently, but these states need to collaborate. The whole West Africa, the whole ECOWAS needs to collaborate. That's why I was even happy when I heard of a joint task force, but not a joint task force to combat coups, but to address insecurity. Because at the end of the day, insecurity is what has led to all the coups in most of the Francophone countries. So ECOWAS needs to come together and build a more robust strategy in addressing insecurity. So whether it's a situation where all African countries create a coalition, and it's a coalition not just based off military attacks, civil society, justice, education, and all that, because as you're clearing a region, other systems should move in to fill in the gap, so that people know that the state is present, because at the end of the day, ungoverned spaces is what feeds terrorism. If we look at this others to the main Sahel countries like Niger, almost one part of Niger is run by the terrorists, one part is run by the government, and is a similar situation with Burkina Faso and Mali. So ungoverned spaces need to be put in check. If not, it's just going to be a cascading situation. Already, JNI are making incursions into Benin Republic. Nigeria has deployed troops and assets in Benin Republic to assist them in this whole situation, because if Benin Republic falls, Nigeria falls, because that means these people have the Western corridor to come into Nigeria more effectively. And the Western region, if you look at the geography, it's very, very dense vegetation. It's a forest, basically, which is prime location, which is prime real estate for these terrorists. They want to be there, they don't want to be in the cities. So we need to have a check on all ungoverned spaces around Africa, or better still, West Africa, and close the envelope on them. That's just the best thing. But a holistic strategy needs to be developed in order to address this. Because at the end of the day, these are not foreigners, they're not coming from somewhere. They are actually Africans. So we're fighting an ideology.
Can you tell us what you think happened from what you've seen and what you've read and your research?
So, from my research and what I can determine from the strike that happened, is a welcome development, because the US brings a lot of capacity that a lot of countries don't have. And, you know, America has the first, second, third, fourth largest air force in the world, with the same thing with the Navy and all. So bringing these capacities and capabilities to Nigeria, and how we use it in addressing these terrorists would be a great force multiplier for us. Because America bring MQ-9 Reaper drones that can loiter in the air for 48 hours plus. You know, these are not just drones with cameras that you put ammunition. They are technologically advanced, to the point whereby even your phone signals can be intercepted. They know where you are. So I feel we need more of this, and the net should be cast wider. It should happen in more regions, and it should be more intensified. But from what I can say is, we can kill one man, another man comes, but it's all the same. There was a past report that Minuki was eliminated in 2024, and which is coming up now. I feel there are two different people, because it's like, when someone dies and you take up a title to make sure to internalize the person's memory or the vision or whatever. I feel like the real Menuki died probably 2024, and this is just another person that's taking up that title. So it's a welcome development, but I realized that Menuki handled the administrative, the bureaucratic angle of ISWAP, and not just ISWAP alone, also along other Islamist group operating within West Africa. And I've come to the conclusion that it's no longer a problem of spreading an ideology. It's a thing of trying to rival the state, the Nigerian state, because it's a situation of whereby they are collecting taxes, they are paying salaries, they are paying pensions, they are doing welfare, they are creating infrastructure, and at the same time, Menuki was the one that handled that. So it just shows how sophisticated these people are, and they're not just some thugs with guns in the forest somewhere. In order to fight bureaucracy, you can't fight bureaucracy with bullets. You fight bureaucracy with bureaucracy. So it's how efficient your own system can be to override the other system. I feel Donald Trump, America and Nigeria basically took out an existential threat to Nigeria, and it's a welcome development.
Okay, well, thank you very much for taking the time to
Thank you
talk to
very
me.
much.
Hopefully you've enjoyed this episode of Sahel Watch. We'll be bringing you more as the weeks and months develop, and the situation here in Nigeria, how it evolves and how it changes and how it morphs with the use of technology and new actors that are involved. I hope you've enjoyed this. It's been Sahel Watch. My name's John Costa. Thank you.